You're going to get an opportunity to dive more into the data and the specifics with our next panel. We are going to bring up the panel to talk about data in motion, transforming the way we move. Daniel, you stay here. Let's put you here, shall we? And let's bring up the moderator for this panel and the whole panel at once, the communications manager at Bitkom, Pauline Bombeck, and her panel. Welcome. Welcome.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much, Sarah, for the kind introduction. Sharing and using mobility data is gaining ever greater importance. Next to several regulatory initiatives, B2B data sharing arrangements and data spaces are picking up momentum. But how can data help interconnecting transport networks, personalize travel experiences, and improve mobility overall? How can we succeed in leveraging different data from different sources? What are the key challenges here? And not to forget, what do we need to establish trust and collaboration among industry players, policymakers, and consumers, ensuring that data sharing is done in a secure, transparent, and mutually beneficial manner? These and other questions I want to discuss with my guests today, and I'm very happy you're all here. Daniel Krauss, we already know you. You're CEO of Hyde Mobility. Very happy you're here. Then we have Christine Wenzel. Sorry. Flix.
I would love to, but short distance pieces also.
Daniel Krauss from Flix, of course. Christine Wenzel, you are Director of Public Policy for DACH and Central Eastern Europe at Tier Mobility. Then, of course, we have Oliver Mackprang, CEO of Hyde Mobility. Welcome to the stage. And not to forget, Hyde, CDO at Trainline. I'm very happy that you're here. Thanks for joining us. You all come from slightly different areas in the mobility sector, but all of you are dealing with data in some way. And Oliver, I would like to start with you and ask you, what kind of database project in your company are you most excited about right now, and why?
I think for us, like for many other providers, there's a ton of data, and the biggest difficulty is picking out the ones or the data points that are actionable quickly. So for us, most of the data that we look at is focused towards internal efficiencies. So that's really what we push the most towards, because that's kind of in our own hands. If we come to conclusions, if we identify nuggets, we can act quickly. When talking about data projects with public policymakers, speed is not what I would say is something that's there in opulence. So when it comes to policymakers, I think the most important thing that we have is some aspect of data alignment. So for us, it's really about the most significant aspect is the motorized individual transport quantum, which is kind of like looking at how large is the individual car population in a city, and looking at our fleet, how we can bridge the gap of understanding of how our vehicles replace private cars. And I think that's coming to some kind of metric that we agree upon with the individual cities, with the individual people in the city office, how to measure this impact.
Thank you, Oliver, for those insights. You've already mentioned several points that we want to talk about a little further. But first, I want to ask you, Christine, what about Tier Mobility? What is the most exciting database project right now for you?
I mean, the overall objective really is to change mobility, right? And in order to achieve that goal, we have to create good alternatives to, let's say, private cars, as we all know. So the most interesting data point is really the intermodal mobility chain to see how and where we can connect well with public transport, for example. Because 80% of car distances are smaller than 20 kilometers, so it's usually short distance. And this is something where we can add value to, where we can get into. If we look at the data points, where do people commute? Where do they start their journey? Where do they enter public transport, for example? And really to provide proof points to cities on how this can function as a puzzle piece towards the intermodal chain. So that's like the mass discussion that I'm sure we're going to deep dive further into.
Interestingly enough, a recent Bitkom survey showed that 600 German companies across different sectors, and the survey showed that data is actually still largely unused in many companies. Only 7% of the companies believe that they are already utilizing data to the full potential. So I would like to talk about potential of data a little bit. Daniel, in your keynote, you have already mentioned the sustainability aspect and talked about how data supports the decarbonization of transport. Could you elaborate a little on that and tell us to what extent you already use the potential of data in the context of sustainability?
So, one main challenge is that with all those hypes, recently, LLM, prior to that AI, and a couple of years ago, big data, people are driven not necessarily by the right intentions. I always think, and that's very close to what Oliver said, the intention is how can we serve the customers best, the society best, and obviously, with each business model, we're running, certain problems come with. And then the question is, how can I have the best intentions and serve the customers well? And what kind of problems do I have to solve? And with that starting questions, then you really go and look what data is necessary in order to do so. For us, it was, for instance, interesting to find out that many people are willing to really offset their travels, but not yet exactly pay the price of a ticket needed to really run fully economically on a battery-driven Flix bus. And then it's the question how you bridge that gap eventually together with partnerships and pilots, so more of those battery-driven buses are going to be produced, and therefore the price drops. Currently, for instance, a double-decker, which is 80 people, is even cheaper than a battery-driven bus with only about 40-something people. And obviously unit economics, speak for themselves.
Christine, what about team mobility? Where do you see the greatest potential of data in your company?
I mean, there's an obvious side to internal efficiencies, as you also have pointed out. From my point of view, the most interesting data point really is the users. Where do they pick them up? Where do they need them? We have a KPI that's called missed demand, so you can see where is a need for mobility and maybe there is no public transport available close by. So you can kind of add on to every local grid individually and really have a tailor-made offer to the users. And I think this is where you can create acceptance, availability, a reliability also of the service, and then the whole picture comes together, right?
So it's really about improving the personal or the individual travel experience for the user, for the consumer. Mike, at Trainline, you already process lots of data in order to improve this travel experience. For example, by providing live information on train lines, on schedules. So what are you currently planning to unlock the potential of data even further?
Yeah, hello. So it's a great question, because at Trainline, we're really laser focused on exactly the point you mentioned, which is how do you create a great and compelling customer experience and use that to ultimately grow rail. Our mission is to get more people onto rail, and our whole company mission is to try and establish more people to make a greener choice when they travel. So our role to play in that really is to partner with as many of the rail operators as we can across Europe. We partner with over 200 at the moment. And on top of that, what we're trying to do is build an incredible customer experience. So in addition to the kind of the job of aggregation of standardizing things like timetables, pricing, ticket classes, fares, making all the complexity go away for the end user, what we're also trying to do is innovate on top of that. So we have a whole bunch of kind of machine learning driven features in the product that sits on top. So for example, we have a system called Split Save, which when you search for a ticket from A to B, the algorithm is trying to guess if there is a cheaper way to get that same ticket to save the customer money. So it's looking for weird combinations, things that you wouldn't normally search for, and trying to do all of that in real time. And it's those it's that combination of trying to abstract away the complexity, but also create real kind of, innovative value-added features for customers, by which we're basically trying to bring more people. And I mean, the exciting thing that we're seeing at the moment is some increasing demand coming from new places as a result of this thing. So for example, last summer, and we're seeing it again now, we're seeing a lot of inbound American visitors, which obviously we didn't see during COVID. But more and more of them are now coming in to take a journey by rail across Europe and say, I'm going to take a 5-day vacation, and maybe I'll do one leg on Deutsche Bahn, one leg on SNCF, another leg on Trenitalia, and then fly back home to the US. And it's kind of experiences like that make sense when you have that laser focus on simplicity at the top, and that ability for someone who knows nothing about rail to kind of jump on and plan a complicated trip.
So customer experience, travel experience, sustainability, just some of the important points when we talk about the potential of data. And when we think about how we can unlock the potential even further, that actually brings us to the next point, which is data sharing and collaboration. Sharing mobility data has been discussed a lot lately. And Oliver, from your point of view, what role does collaboration and data sharing play in improving the mobility ecosystem as a whole?
It's of course the focal point. The complexity is people, to be honest. When you talk to different cities, they have different understandings of what it is they're trying to track and measure. I think some level of standardization would be fantastic. The difficulty is oftentimes that the city or the municipality wants everything without the ability or the staffing, let's say, to kind of analyze data. So I think what you need to kind of start off with is, what is the KPI, whatever it is, which you are trying to improve, and how do you define it and measure it, and then what are the aggregate data points that kind of become the sum of what you're trying to measure. And that is something that, like, I have to say that the cities are very diverse in their understanding thereof. Like, some cities are very far and others are not. And I think that's like the difficulty we have, right? If just to give you it sounds like very abstract what I'm saying, but to give you a straightforward example. So at Miles, some cities want trip information. They want the ride information. So how long is your average trip? What's a trip? Is it where the customer starts and ends the ride, or is it where the customer starts, pauses, and then continues? Is that 2 trips, or is that 1 overall trip? And cities, oftentimes when you ask the question back, they're like, oh, we don't know, send both. And that kind of like puts you aghast, because you're like, well, wait, what were you trying to measure in the first place? And I think that this is something where, if you're talking with city A and they want 1, 2, 3, and you're talking with city B and they want 2, 6, 7, and you're talking with city C, and it just becomes this, like, the cities are not speaking the same language. And that's like where I think we need to spend a lot of time, maybe as an industry, standardizing the way that we deliver data, which we'd be happy to do, of course.
So you've already mentioned some challenges, especially when working together with cities, municipalities. Daniel, how do you already collaborate with different stakeholders, and why is data sharing relevant for you at Flix?
So basically, I can only second what Oliver said. We, on a city perspective, we need information of where our customers come from in order to eventually also serve them right at the bus stations and stops, and that's not always working well. But particularly if you look at incumbents, rather state-owned, that doesn't work. I mean, we had certain jurisdiction these days in Germany that the monopolies have to share data. I mean, we can only show lifetime data of Deutsche Bahn if they provide all of us and not only Google. On the one hand, on the other hand, mentioning Google, there are de facto standards which are relatively easy already, like GDFS, which sometimes, especially in Europe, the policymakers are kind of afraid of because it's originated in private areas. And last but not least, what is very usual of having built up these companies here on stage is the MVP approach, the minimum valuable product. And the question is, okay, what's the minimum of the data to share to start with? And not directly, as Oliver said, like, start with, we need everything, because that only creates a mess and not a value at all.
Before taking a deeper look into the challenges, Christine, from a micro-mobility perspective, can you tell us about your experience at Tier Mobility, and maybe you've got some best practice examples or even worst practice examples when collaborating with, let's say, government bodies, authorities, but also other transportation providers?
So, I mean, on the challenges, we probably talk about this later on. Maybe on the pro side, there was 2 weeks ago, there was a study from the Hochschule St. Gallen, which proved that with a good and intuitive mass platform, for example, that people that usually would choose a private car, that they would be in a position or would be enabled to easier understand public transportation, alternative mobility options. So it's a tool to build a bridge towards alternatives that are comfortable, available, sometimes we really underestimate the non-understanding of public transport or alternatives, right? So it seems easier to just choose the private car. And for example, this I think was a very interesting learning from the study in St. Gallen, that a good intuitive mass platform can really make it easier to shift and maybe try out one or the other alternative and then see where it leads to. So that was a positive.
Mike, regarding challenges, we've already heard some obstacles, some hurdles before. What are the greatest challenges that you see in collaborating with various actors? And when sharing data in mobility?
Yeah, so at Trainline, we advocate very strongly for having like a level playing field across the way rail works. We strongly believe that having open access and a high degree of collaboration to sharing data around the whole industry is going to improve competition, it's going to improve innovation, it's going to bring more people into the market. Generally speaking, we're seeing quite a lot of positive momentum across Europe for that. As an example, if you look at what's happening in Spain right now, there's a very high degree of collaboration that's kicking off there as the access to the rail is opening up. More and more operators are coming in, and also more and more mobility platforms like us are also able to aggregate and operate in that space. So if you travel between Madrid and Barcelona today, there are 4 different train operators who all compete for your business on that service. And as a result of that, guess what? The price has gone down over the last year, and also fewer people are traveling by air between those 2 cities because they're switching onto rail. So the pot has grown. So we're starting to see more and more examples of this across the continent, that gradually this opening up, and it all comes from starting with sharing data, basically, so that organizations like us and others can then aggregate that together and make that marketplace work. And like I say, there's still challenges. We still have challenges with some operators, some countries that are less keen to do that. But it feels like things are moving forward. I mean, there was a big decision yesterday, for example, here in Germany, where the competition authority ruled that there had been some anti-competitive practices from the state player. And so we're starting to see momentum, I think, not just here in Germany, but also in France and Spain. Because ultimately, Germany wants to double the number of people on rail by 2030, right? Which is a big part of the climate commitment. And other countries in Europe have the same type of agenda and type of target. So we've got to get moving, basically. That's a huge target. So we need to, I think, increase the rate of that collaboration. We haven't really got time to spend the next 5 years arguing about data standards and whether or not we're going to collaborate with each other. We've got a real problem, which is actually how are we going to get people to switch their travel choices en masse if we're going to hit, net carbon zero against the targets that, European governments have signed up to.
Oliver, do you maybe want to extend on the challenges that you face at Miles, but also maybe you have some best practices where data sharing already works well on a national from a national perspective, but maybe also international perspective?
So I really think that Daniel's comment, MVP, right? Like at the end of the day, it's much better to have like an aggregate, a couple lines of facts and figures, and kind of build up from there. I have to say that it's unfortunately still a very local game, but I think that the cities would also do well in speaking with each other closer. We operate in Belgium as well. Belgium honestly feels like 3 different countries. We operate in Brussels, Ghent, and Antwerp, and it's like completely different. And I have to say, so is the way to collaborate with the city. And so I feel that there's a lot of data that's extremely standardized already, like number of privately registered vehicles, like Kraftfahrtbundesamt in Germany, they put that figure out, right? So that's a standard. If we do a standard of how large is our fleet, how many trips do we do, how many customers do we have, and we look at how our figures match against these figures that are registered in a city over time, that would be like a starting point. I often I really feel that it comes down to like actionable data, taking something that you can understand and moving from there. When a city requests like 200 different line items, like in real time, and there's no one that works at the city that can interpret the data, like it becomes complicated. So I think like the most important thing is like starting small and maybe grasping or attaching it to some data point that's historically valid for the last 60 years and saying like, let's see how this changes.
Because what would you say? What do you consider the hallmarks maybe of success in data sharing, and what do you think is necessary to ensure that data sharing is done in a secure and in a transparent, mutually beneficial manner?
Well, at this point, TIER is in about 100 cities in Germany. With most of them, we share the asked for data, often very, very fragmented, for free, of course. And I can only confirm that the capacity, sometimes just the digital skill set to interpret the data and take action based on this mobility data is just lacking. Usually, some would ask us even for a PDF, even today in 2023. So it's just, I wish the data would be also looked at and taken action upon. There's so much to do in terms of city planning, infrastructure planning. I mean, we don't talk only digital, right? I mean, all the data in the world is in mobility only relevant if you translate it onto the streets. You have bicycle infrastructure, shared concepts. You really have to consider the actual road and make things happen, redistribute the public space, as we all know. And then, I mean, this would make sense. And this is what I'm missing. So we are sharing data already, but someone needs to look at it, I guess. That's and take action upon that.
Daniel, you grabbed your mic. Do you want to add something?
So basically, sometimes I don't get whether it's just, a certain legacy idea of having to get control over everything, my city, my country, mein Schatz, right? This is not needed. There is competition, vital competition, and the only one who really has control is the customer. And obviously, we should focus on how can we, broaden and increase the alternative efforts and modes of transportation, so the customer have a better choice. And that's a different mindset, and that's not necessarily if the officials ask us what I think they have in mind. It's rather like I have to control where Flix buses stop, where Miles cars stand. It's like, no. We have to jointly figure out how we can, make that place, country, city, whatever, a better place. And that mindset change is, I don't know, I don't recognize that yet. It's rather the control freaking addicts.
Mike?
Can I add one thing? So totally agree. I really think there's an opportunity and a need for a mind shift. I mean, I spent the last 10 years working in a different industry, in big technology for Microsoft and Facebook and stuff. And then when I came into transportation, I was amazed at how much sort of infighting there is between, sort of incumbent carriers and so on. And I feel as if there's an opportunity for us to come together a bit more, because there's a bigger problem to solve. We don't need, different transport operators to be arguing with each other. What we need to do is work out how do we create like large-scale shift in behavior? How do we get people to stop, burning lots of fossil fuel by flying short distances, and get onto all the kind of transportation that we collectively represent? I think, and it just struck me that I feel as if that's moving in the right direction, but it also feels like, we need to sort of like, level up, I think, as an industry.
Thank you for that. I would like to jump to the next point and take a closer look into the regulatory framework, as there are several initiatives ongoing right now on national but also European levels. For example, the German Mobility Data Act and also the European Multimodal Digital Mobility Services Initiative. Not an easy name. Christine, from a business point of view, what are key considerations for such initiatives?
Well, I mean, obviously, when it comes to data sharing overall, that's something we do already. Would be great to have a standardized set. But obviously, I mean, it depends on the type of data. If it's commercially sensitive, it's still quite a fresh market. For example, scooters are only for 4 years around in Germany, so it's still kind of high wave. So it depends on the type of data and on the detail. And frankly, I would love to see also political objectives linked to this, because my main interest is not, a commercial third-party use of whatever type of mobility data, but rather city decisions for infrastructure, for city planning, to actually create the change that we all here want to see. So this is something I would love to see in the regulation, also as an obligation from policymakers to finally, get moving and creating the shift that we need, and not just, have companies share the data and then what?
Oliver, do you agree? And what do you think? How can legislation succeed in also striking a balance between protecting trade secrets, but at the same time laying the foundations for more data sharing?
Europe is the leader in regulation, right? I mean, we do, no one does it as well as Europe, right? We regulate everything quickly. I think one of the aspects here is kind of bringing in the operators. So when we, speak with the city of Hamburg, or it takes 40 minutes for the different car sharing providers to sit down, agree on what it is we are willing to share, and this could maybe be challenged from an authority point of view, asked for more, but we're quite, open and willing to share. And I think I completely agree with what you just said, that once we agree on the data set and we all share it to the cities, it would be fantastic, right? Because it's standardized, everybody does it regularly. But then also to come to an understanding of what line item is good, what line item is bad and should be attempted to be reduced, and what is the obligation of the city to act once there's proof points, once there's a trend that starts, right? So if one city enables something and you see the good line item expand and the bad line item reduce, and you see another city take action and the opposite occurs, whether it's municipal, then federal or European, there should be okay, you've done this, trial and error, this is not working, this is working. I think once you have this regulation, this data sharing in place, I think there should also be a standard of regulation because currently what we have in this term is we always have this uphill battle of regulation. So we have to ask the city to change something for the positive. And I think that if we are the leader in regulation, the positive should be the standard, and the city should have to advocate to do something negative. And currently, it's an uphill battle to get something positive done. And I think once you standardize the data, I think you should standardize the way that it's positively regulated.
Daniel, which aspects should be addressed in these initiatives from your point of view?
So I mentioned it earlier already. It's a question of MVP. That data set I mentioned. What do we need to start with? And I think that's also something which it's about the operators and the customers. It does not have to be artificial on the one hand, and on the other hand, which is also funny enough, in some of the European countries, thanks to EU, the data we need is open already and accessible, right? Like census data or so. But not in every country. I mean, Germany is a little bit, fallen behind. And on the other hand, I keep on being asked of the government to share something, and which is fair. But on the other hand, it's I also need something to increase my offer and make it better to the customers. And then I, in a best case, get folders of paper sent over. I mean, that's not exactly what the MVP or the data set definition is in my mind.
Yeah, concerning data sharing, data spaces such as the German mobility data space and Iona X in France are gaining popularity, and the European Union is currently planning a common European mobility data space. Daniel, I would like to ask you again. I understand that you already participate in the German mobility data space, right? So, in your view, what potential can such data spaces unlock?
So those data spaces you were mentioning are kind of semi-private, right? And if the regulator only sets the MVP, the basis, what is the absolute necessity, and what the problem, what the political objectives are to being solved, the rest can be solved in those groups and gatherings where operators and customers and communities sit together and figure that out. And therefore, we believe those kind of private initiatives are very important because they usually are driven by the same, just serving the customer and making things better.
Christina, how do or how should such voluntary initiatives interact with legislation?
That's a tricky one. I mean, the mobility data space, I think it is a good idea. We're also part of it. But for example, there's a very strong push for like the commercial interest of mobility data, which is fine, but again, for us, it's not the top priority. So I'm missing the public benefit of mobility data in those initiatives. And maybe this is something where legislation can then, pick that up, create trust, also as a platform for data sharing. But yeah, I guess the public benefit of mobility data is something I'm missing. And that would be great to have that linked.
Thank you. I'm afraid we are running out of time, but I have one last question for all of you, and I would ask you to please answer in one word. I know that's always kind of difficult, so maybe we can say one short sentence. Let's start with you, Daniel, in one word. What is the key to improving the way we leverage data in mobility?
Focusing on the customer and making clear problem statements, what we try to solve.
Thank you. Christina?
Make alternatives easy and comfortable.
Oliver, your one word on how to improve data mobility?
Baby steps. Focus on what's actionable.
And Mike?
Collaboration. We
Collaborate.
need to collaborate as an industry to make this thing work.
Collaboration is key. Thank you so very much for the discussion, for your insights and impulses. Let's have a big round of applause for Daniel Krauss from Flix, from Christine Wenzel from T-Mobility, Oliver Mackprang from Miles, and Mike Hyde from Trainline. Thank you.